Welcome back to the Talk Past podcast. Of course, I am the occasional, usual host, NC, and today I have a wonderful guest from the festival we do.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Kat. I've known NC for a number of years.
What is it,
I've
10?
been,
10
uh,
now?
oh yeah, I think 10 going on 11 years. Yeah, because I started doing the show in 2011 when we did
Yeah.
Peasant Revolt
Mhm.
a million years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I did cosplay for a little bit.
Mhm.
I don't really do that anymore because
Yeah.
the pandemic. Uh, um, but if anyone cares to look up my cosplay Instagram account,
Mhm.
it's cat period underscore period Taylor. Um, I don't think I've posted on there for almost a whole year, but
Mhm.
there's
Yep.
still stuff on there. There's some pretty stuff if people want to
Mhm.
take a peek. And I'm also part of FCFT. I know you've had a Caleb on a few times,
Yeah.
and he's also in that. I'm known as the Lady of the Lace for that group. Um, I'm basically in charge of costuming and designing uh, logos or sigils and things like that, and making them for when we actually do things.
Getting the actual everything done while they play with the swords, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I am the behind the scenes worker that actually gets stuff done while the boys
Mhm.
are all out playing with their swords.
This episode, of course, next Monday, so the 14th. Happy Valentine's to everybody, including yourself.
Oh, thank you, and
Which
you.
is
Happy Valentine's.
indeed, we always do these in advance, so I just post them whenever I can. But I know this one specifically is going to be on Valentine's because we just haven't done the um, one for the Northman trailer, which
Gotcha.
we'll see how that goes. But of course, this in particular is about a little kind of a cross series. Like we have the festival stories where we talk to obviously individuals like yourself doing the fair and just learn about each other and what we do besides just the festival and our perspectives. But also a few other little segues that are kind of happening in the podcast. This one is going to be about women of history, obviously specifically medieval history, but women that I think and we as a group believe are notable individuals to kind of learn about. And though we're not archaeologists, see what we do know of them and what we can convey and how that knowledge sort of relates to both ourselves and what we do as reenactors. So, uh, of course, you let me know prior to, but who are you wanting to discuss?
Yeah, so I chose Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was the mother of the well-known King Richard the Lionheart and the evil Prince John. And she
Hmm.
was a character played by our lovely Michelle a few years ago when we did the siege of Chateau de Chalus-Chabrol.
Hmm.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen the Russell Crowe Robin Hood movie that came out oh wow, a long
Yeah,
time ago.
a while back. I think
Yeah.
it was that like early 2000s,
Yeah, I
mid
think so. I think
late.
early or mid 2000s, but that was
Mhm.
that was the movie that started the kind of like new age of medieval stories, I want to say, but she was in that movie. And anytime that they did like a little cut to what Prince John was doing,
Mhm.
Eleanor of Aquitaine was there. And the first time we see Eleanor, she's walking into John's room, and the I guess the chambermaids are around the door, and they're listening to John and a another woman rustling
Hmm.
in there. So she just barges in, throws off the sheets, and like that kind of sets the tone for her entire character, which I thought was very accurate because she basically ran England um, during the time of Prince John when he was King John, and when Richard was king. So she was basically running everything, and her sons were just figureheads.
I imagine, as a lot of kids tend to be back then, especially if they're noble. Um, so let's get a starting point then. Um, so obviously, we all want to know a little bit in terms of a backstory for her before the point of, I guess, what we would consider her historical aspect, right? When she kind of started doing some more important things. Where did she come from?
It
Is
is,
she,
yeah. So she was born in 1122 um, in France, and she was the daughter of William the Tenth, who was the Duke of Aquitaine, and he was the largest landholder in all of France at that time.
Mhm.
And when she was 15, no, when she was 14, I'm sorry, her father died, and she took over running the estate. And the King of France, who was Louis the Sixth, yeah, Louis the Sixth, also known as Fat Louis, um, he was given custody over Eleanor, basically overseeing everything of her and making sure her welfare was okay.
'Cause
So
she was still a child at the time, I
yeah, she was
imagine.
still a young girl, 14, almost 15. And what does a rich king of France want to do with the daughter who has now holds the largest estate in all of France?
Mhm.
He's gonna marry her to his own son, and
Yep.
that's what he did. Um, Thinking that okay, he's gonna hang on to this estate and it's gonna make him a lot of money, but he died. He died a month after the wedding. Um, so his son became Louis the Seventh, and Eleanor was Queen of France.
Hmm. So that was pretty
And
quick. That kind of
yeah,
reminds me of, King Tutankhamun. Uh, Obviously very, very distant in terms of time frame, but similar situation vaguely in my head, if I remember it correctly. He was also, a child. That situation that forced him
yeah,
into,
I think he
being
was
a
like
king.
9 or 10, and he
Yeah,
married his sister, I think.
yeah. Things were, of course, different back then.
Yeah.
But, of course, he was also, he had a lot of, health issues. But,
Mhm.
it just kinda reminds me that because that tends to happen a lot in medieval history, where people tend to rise up into actual power a little bit maybe too early. Um, but, maybe she did better than the others, I don't know. I'm literally going off the top of my head in that regard. I don't particularly remember anyone of age having any sort of decent abilities. How was she once she acquired her seat? Once that sort of kinda avalanche happened and she became more of a public and a power figure?
So, when Eleanor became queen, she took off. She hit the ground running.
Mhm.
Um, she was very much involved in the running of France. And her husband, she convinced him to go on a second crusade. There's already one big one, and this was a second one going to the Holy Land. And the church ordered her not to go. She had to stay behind because it was a woman's duty to stay behind. Um, so she kind of said, screw that, went anyway, and she gathered 300 women, dressed them in armor, and put them on horseback and had them accompany them to the Holy Land on that crusade.
That's definitely unique. Obviously, I can draw a similarity to Ethelfled from, uh I'm trying to
Being like
think
a
what.
warrior queen in a
Yeah,
way.
trying to think of the year that she went out to. Not only did she go out and defeat the Vikings, or perhaps at the time, we'll just say invaders, because I mean, they were more of settlers.
Yeah, but both Ethelfled and Eleanor are kind of cut from the same cloth.
Yeah.
They were kind of pushed into to power because I know Ethelfled, she had a brother who took
Yep.
the crown before her, and then he died, and she was kind of married off to a bunch of different guys, and once she was in power, she kind of was like, "You know what? I'm gonna do what my father wanted me to do, or what my father set off to do, and I'm gonna beat off these invaders and secure a safe place for the Anglo-Saxons."
Which of course has nothing to do with the Last Kingdom in terms
Yeah.
of what actually happened. Um,
I stopped watching that show because it got a little bit too ridiculous.
Convoluted, yeah. I mean, I really loved the first season. I love the dynamic of some of the characters, but obviously the Viking stuff is just absolute fantasy. Um,
Yeah.
I've never watched Tudors or I I stopped after like 2.5 seasons of Vikings. But back on Eleanor in terms of that nature, of course, the Crusade uh, is sort of an intricate. I don't know if you maybe if it's a scam or like some sort of means of like a complicated kind of a way of divulging through the power and perhaps the corruption of the church. Because as I remember with the Crusades, the Templars, they I mean they a lot of people, kings of course, send the Templars off to fight these crusades, probably hoping they'd die. Um, by the time they came back, and apparently none of the nobles wanted to pay them off, so they just kind of killed them off. Um, so for Eleanor to basically do as the Templars, right? Just sort of
Mhm.
just go out there, be an absolute
An
sort of
absolute girl boss.
an absolute girl boss, and do that. Uh, makes me wonder because obviously being raised back then, unfortunately a little bit today, still needs to be adjusted, but specifically historically speaking, uh, men and women were raised differently, almost as if you were cut from completely different cloth, as to say, men were expected of this, women are expected of that, especially if you were noble. Um,
Yeah.
so I know she would have been taught to dance. She would have been taught to sew and this and that, which is stupid. Although the sewing is very important,
Yeah.
but as a noble, she would have at least been trained to fight, right? Or would that have been something that she would have learned as a queen, or perhaps on her own? Is there any sort of talking point of that?
In what I saw, doing some research on her, I did not see anything about her, picking up a sword or doing any kind of fighting, anything like that. But what she did know how to do, she knew how to work a court. And when they went to the Holy Land, they still were like stopping by these different courts of kings in the Middle East and
Mm,
everything. And she was extremely popular in those courts. She was wooing everyone, making alliances and allies, which sometimes can be a lot more useful than knowing how to fight.
right.
And
Like,
her husband was, like, really jealous of how popular she was, and that's where their marriage started to falter. And after having 2 daughters and being married for 15 years, um, their marriage got annulled,
mhm,
and, the grounds of that annulment was, Louis, her husband, started having a lot of really public affairs, and, the Pope also said that they were Eleanor and Louis were really closely related, so he annulled it on that account. But if they were that closely related, why did he allow them to get married in the first place? And I think that's
mhm,
going back to corruption of the church. The French court probably paid off the Pope to say something.
as can happen. So she sounds
Yeah.
like definitely a political situation for her. Obviously, my cross reference would be Ethel Fled, who was more of the combat person, or Joan of Arc, of course, more of that combat individual. But I think it is, as we're finding out, a little bit more important to be, or perhaps to have the gift of the gab, if you will. But I think people perhaps now we realize, but back then maybe underestimate, the power of politics.
Oh yeah, she had so much power, and Michelle, who played Eleanor during that was that was in 20, oh goodness.
Mhm.
I think that was in 20 um 18. I think so.
Now, of
18 was
course,
King Alfred. Okay.
memory does not serve me
I
well.
have to go look
Um,
this up.
what year was that? Oh, what year in terms of how we call it? Like we would see be like Viking year or Joan of Arc year, Irish year.
Yeah, this was our King Richard year. Yeah, this was
Okay,
Lionheart year.
okay. So at that point, she was an older woman. Obviously, not to insult, but obviously played by Michelle. And Michelle is a tremendous actor, I would rather say. Um, she, I mean, she plays all her roles, kind of like that, because she is a very commanding figure. But I don't know me specifically if I had much interaction with her or them. In fact, I kind of don't really remember what I was doing Lionheart year, but staying with her at the moment in our conversation in the younger years, kind of fledgling into the crusade. How did she get involved in the crusade? Was it like a family driven event as sometimes, or was that specifically a political move?
That was as far as the research that I did on her, that was a political
Mhm.
move. She convinced her husband to go on the crusade, and there is some speculation about specifically why.
Okay,
Um, some people theorize that it was to kind of get in better, in a better, I
protection.
guess, yeah, or better graces of the church, you would say. But I'm not sure how accurate that is because if she wanted to uh, get in better graces of the church, if the church told her not to go, but then she went anyway.
Hmm.
So I don't think that there's an
Yeah, I mean,
exact reason that can be discerned as to why she
maybe.
went.
Yeah, maybe not off the top of our heads. Do you think that's more of like showing that she is with her people, or showing some sort of presence to kind of help rally or help morale? Or do you think it's just to be there or escape something? Or what do you think her motive in terms of physically being at a battlefield would have been in her position?
Yeah, I think it was to gain favor with the people because she was always considered the people's queen.
Mhm.
She was very down to earth. She was very much a feminist of medieval times, and maybe even a pretty feminist for today. Just having a bunch of women going into battle and kind of being like, I can go defend you guys too. I can use my knowledge in political courts and everything
Mhm.
to secure safety and make sure that we're not sending our men and our boys off to more needless wars.
Yeah.
I think that would be more of uh, more of her drive for that.
But did Louis fight in the crusade, Second Crusade?
Yeah, Louis was there. I
Her
don't know
husband.
whether or not he was actually on the battlefield, um, because you know with nobility and everything,
Yeah.
sometimes the kings they just go there and show their presence, be like, "Oh,
Mhm.
I was there. I got my participation medal."
Yeah.
And sometimes they actually go to fight. I think it just depended on the political situation of the country at that time, whether or not there was an heir. And with Eleanor having two daughters, it really wasn't one specifically. Um,
Yes, yes.
yeah, so they might not, Louis might not have actually been on the battlefield, but not 100% certain on that.
Mhm.
Um,
I know he wasn't a particularly good king,
no,
or figurehead, but after the crusade, what kinda happened with her? Because she's coming back after literally a war, bringing her ladies in waiting with her. What happened, continuing on from there?
Yeah, so after they came back from the crusade, their marriage was pretty much over. They'd been married for 15 years.
Oof.
So, yeah, the Pope gave them the Pope, Pope.
Mhm. Yeah,
The
close
Pope
enough.
gave them the annulment. So they separated, and 2 months after their marriage was annulled, here comes Henry the First of England, otherwise known as Henry Plantagenet of the famous Plantagenet line.
Mhm.
Um, he marries Eleanor, and Eleanor is 30 years old right now. So that's pretty late in the game
Yeah.
for a queen at that time. And they go on to have 7 little kids.
Bit much, but okay.
And yeah, yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. Um, oh, I'm sorry, they had 5 kids. So Eleanor had 7 in total, 5 kids with Henry. Um, but weirdly enough, this is weird to like our standards
Yeah.
nowadays because when you think parents get divorced, so the mom
Yeah.
usually keeps the kids, but Louis kept the daughters and
Oh,
had them married off to fancy French royal people. But
okay.
yeah, yeah, Eleanor, newly single and no kids in tow, goes off and marries Henry Plantagenet. They have
Of
yeah,
course, not to completely cut you off there, but that makes me think. Obviously, completely off the top of my head, our heads, um, without the archaeological info in front of us. But what do you think that reason is for? Was that? I mean, unfortunately, obviously, women back then were sometimes even if you were queen, were treated almost as if you were property,
yeah,
basically,
basically
um,
like a queen's sole job was considered to just make an heir.
like an ant,
Yeah.
or a bee.
Yeah. I think there might have been a little push from the English court and maybe her husband to get some babies out because this was a brand new line on the English throne.
Hmm.
Um, because I believe um, Henry Plantagenet was a nephew of the previous king, so it wasn't a direct line. So there was kind of like a push to get heirs out so they could start their own line of the monarchy.
Yeah, his father was Count of Anjou, which was a count. He was basically
Yeah.
Sesame Street, not a king.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, no, that's odd. Obviously, it kind of reminds me of like lions. You know, when lions come in to a new territory, they just kind of like wipe the slate clean, to sort of kindly say. Um,
Yeah, yeah, that's putting it kindly.
mhm. I understand having a lot of children in the sense back then it probably was more like a litter in the sense that, you know, some are not gonna make it. So just
Yeah, and
push
some of
them
her
all out.
kids didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so her firstborn was William. He died when he was 3 years old, and then she
Mhm.
had 2 more boys, Richard and uh and then she had John, and his original name was Lackland. I see why he changed it to John. King Lackland sounds pretty weird. Um, and then she had daughters. She had another Eleanor, and then she had Matilda, and she married them off to a bunch of high-ranking nobles
Mhm.
in Europe, and based on that, she was given the name the Grandmother of Europe
Yeah.
because their children went on to be noble, and basically she did what Queen Victoria did, had a bunch of kids, married them off, and she had ties to every single major noble house in Europe.
Yeah. I mean, basically the whole Game of Thrones thing, if we wanna reference. I mean,
Yeah.
like we said back in just a few minutes ago in regards to both politics and,
They were basically pawns, and one of the reasons that she had so many kids and married them off is if you have connections to all these houses,
yeah,
why would they rebel against you?
exactly.
So
Um,
it was a political move as well.
Indeed, effectively creating kind of like a web. Same thing that Alfred did, obviously, with his kids. And then there's, so I mean, that kind of, I don't think that happens too much, at least where we are anymore. But back then, that was a pretty good way of securing a lot of land and a lot of power. Um, but but I guess going into a timeline that we were discussing, now she's with Henry. She's having his children instead of Louis. Was at least that one better in terms of a marriage? Obviously, a little bit more politically advancing, but
Yeah, politically advancing. Yeah, she was able to hold the favor of both the people of England and France and Aquitaine, because she
mhm,
still had her estates there. And she started what was called the Court of Love, um, which is pretty appropriate for Valentine's Day.
mhm,
She was really involved in a miniature Renaissance back then, and kind of revived a few different poetry movements. So when we think of all the medieval music and the bards and all the stories, that was because of her. 'Cause otherwise, there was a good chance that all of those things would have been lost. And she was also like a huge patron of the arts. I believe she helped fund a college of the arts in France.
yeah,
But and she super involved in politics in England. But then she got uh, divorced again.
mhm. Which, yeah, yeah, if one guy isn't good and the other guy isn't good, move on.
Yeah,
Um,
after
but
40 years of marriage. So she's 70 at this time when she gets divorced
oof,
for the second time. So
oh,
that's
man.
she's already up there in age.
Oh yeah. But of course, backtracking just a small frame. So we're talking a little bit in terms of timeline, very sort of plot point, plot point, plot point. You bring up the more human nature of her as a patron of the arts, as an individual that is a little bit more than just what we would think of as these political figures. Um, Probably both in terms of modern and historical. People are people, and people are human, whether they want to be or not. Is there anything that you may know or that we might be able to discern about her? And my thought is in terms of a worldwide situation, like how much reach would Eleanor of Aquitaine have had, both as queen, with her politics, but also in terms of her access? How much access would she have had and been able to sort of understand and sort of put out into the world with this love of art?
Yeah, so she had a little bit of reach. She obviously was able to have reach in the courts where all of her daughters were married off to. Um, One of her daughters was married to um, a Duke of Bavaria,
Hmm,
and another one was married to a king of Sicily in Italy. So my theory is she essentially set up the the string of events for the Renaissance that happened a few hundred years later, because she set up that communication lines between Italy, where the Renaissance started,
yeah.
and France, who is considered another big Renaissance country, because of all the paintings and the love of art. So I think because of
So
her
she would
love
have.
of art and where her children were placed, she essentially set up the revival of art and music in all of Europe.
I think art is more important than fighting, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah. It definitely can have a lot of influence. I mean, art can. Art can start wars and end them at the same time. So I think
Mhm.
it's a lot of a better thing to be involved in politically than just war.
Right. So she had reach, and then I mentioned well traveled, but is she the kind of person, off the top of my head again, for those listening, I have no clue. The kind of person that would have been able to have that access to travel across the world, to possibly, like she had during the crusade, give that sort of physical influence, sort of
Oh,
like
yeah. Yeah, she did. Um, so, uh, when she instigated a rebellion against her former husband, with her
Mhm,
sons, John and Richard. And so she was in Aquitaine at this time because she had been separated. So she kept traveling back and forth, England and Aquitaine. So she traveled a lot for a person of her age, and she's 80 years old, instigating
mhm,
rebellions. And when Richard gets the throne of England, he's like, "Cool, I'm here. I'm leaving. I'm gonna go on another crusade." And and we all know Richard gets captured in the
yeah,
crusade. Um, Eleanor goes to to pay his ransom personally and then escort him back to France. And on their way back, they decide to put down this cute little rebellion that's happened at this little French chateau. And that's when our fair scenario, our Richard the Lionheart year, that's when that happened. And King Richard got a an arrow in the neck,
mhm.
historically speaking, and for our scenario, we were able to do a dagger in the heart.
You mentioned earlier, queen or person of the people. Um, what was the basically the opinion of her at the time? Perhaps at this time when she's in her older years.
Yeah, so she still is able to like um get people to like her. She still holds the favor of a majority of people throughout England still and throughout her territories in France. Um and but with her own family in her older years, she started to get tested a little bit, I'll say,
Mhm,
because one of her grandchildren decided to start his own little rebellion and try
mhm,
and go after some of John's her second son, who's now king, um, John's territories, who were her territories in Anjou. So Eleanor is still living in Aquitaine. So she travels to stop this rebellion, and she successfully does with funding and with her own personal army. So while she's still holding the favor of the people, her own family are seeing that, okay, she's older, maybe she's weak, maybe we can slip in there and get some of that money.
mhm. Yeah, no.
And she beats off that rebellion, and then her grandson tries again, and she stops him again. And those were the only two, um, I'll say, land wars, for the continent of Europe that King John was ever involved in, and he won those because of his mother.
Oh,
Again,
yeah.
being like really savvy and gaining this web and amassing wealth and status and an army.
Which I mean, really, you can only do at that point. Sounds like an incredibly intelligent individual,
Mhm.
even for the time. Which, of course, medieval intelligence. They were intelligent, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Not like
she was
today.
extremely intelligent,
Mhm.
especially with her being like 80, 81 at the time.
Oh yeah, and sounds like she was at least loved. Majority, of course, loved by the people, which helps you along even more with if something that you need to do. Um,
Yeah.
uh, but of course, at this point, 80. When did she pass?
She retired to a convent in 1204, and she passed away there at the age of 81. And there's
Mm,
actually a quote from the nuns that cared for her after she passed,
mhm.
and says she was beautiful and just imposing and modest, humble and elegant. and she surpassed almost all the queens of the world. So that shows you what the Commonwealth thought of her.
What was what was her thoughts as she was getting older and seeing all of these things kind of come and go? Um, is there anything anywhere that is in her, I guess, thoughts? Anything
Like
that
in
she may have
her
written down?
writings, her thoughts,
Yeah,
not that I could find, um, 'cause I think it's part of the fact is that she was a woman and she had a lot of estates, so maybe she hid a diary somewhere and someone couldn't find it or,
yeah,
through going through the crusades and rebellions, maybe some of her belongings were destroyed, but I would probably chalk it up to her being a woman, and we don't really have a lot of information about her. There's no consensus about what she looked like. There's no paintings, there's no descriptions of her in any stories or books or anything like that. And we don't even know if the stone carving on top of her gravesite, if that's accurate or not.
right. 'Cause, I mean, information back then, it would have been. I'm gonna look for that, see if there is something in archaeological research papers, and post it here on the Discord server. If so, because to be that kind of person, that well traveled, who's gone through the world and back, who's gone through 80 years of wars and had to deal with what she's dealt with, I would be fascinated to hear her thoughts, specifically her thoughts, right? You know, pen to paper, um, on her life. But I know things like that tend to either disappear, not happen. That's what we're missing is a lot of firsthand accounts with all this historical stuff. Um, but is there anything remaining physically besides her tomb of hers,
Of
artifacts of any
hers,
kind of nature?
no, it's basically just her tomb. All of the what would have been royal jewels and things that she would have worn, accessories, clothing. The clothing's all gone, deteriorated,
Hmm.
and jewels. There are some um, that may still be in the royal jewels now, but we don't know for certain because a lot of the times uh, when different dynasties, I'll say, pass the crown from one to the other.
Yeah.
Because after the Plantagenet line, there was the War of the Roses, which
Hmm.
kind of led into the Tudor era, and there was like a bunch of murder and deceit and family drama and stuff. They destroyed a lot of things from each other's family just out of spite and repurposed family jewels and things that they had to again out of spite kind of be like, well, I turned this into
Yeah.
something else for me. So there's a very good chance that a lot of jewels, if they were well kept, can still be in the royal jewels today.
Yeah, that's a bit of a shame. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, as a queen, she should have been. I don't know. I don't know if they had the inclination of what we would have in terms of history. You know, the preservation of history. But I would feel like you would put that somewhere, something, some means of acknowledging this person's existence, other than a gravestone. Um, so that's a bit of a shame. I understand,
Yeah.
obviously, people are douchebags and tend to destroy history, even today. But uh, so basically, pretty much everything we know of her is kind of like secondhand, kind of passed down from people saying things, right?
hmm And even in the 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 poetry and the different movements that she started when she was Queen of England with the troubadours and everything, we would not have all the stories of Robin Hood and Richard the Lionheart if it wasn't for her starting those movements. So
Mhm.
I think it's a shame that we have all of those different stories about those times, but we have nothing about Eleanor,
Nothing
who
tangible.
gave
Yeah.
us these stories. Yeah.
Not even like art. Like, I mean, as a queen or even just a patron of the art, you'd think she'd have maybe had stuff made for her, like,
Yeah.
those really bad medieval paintings of cats.
Mhm. Yeah, it would have given us something, and there's
Yeah.
plenty of her sons, there's plenty of portraits of
No.
them, but unfortunately, there's no official portrait of her.
And I think that's a shame. Because I feel like, that sort of dichotomy of male and female that was made then is negative in terms of the impact that it has on history and what we can look back on today. So I mean, today we realize everybody's a person, everybody's human, everybody does the same thing. We're all the same person, just different experiences. So to curry favor just because of one particular body part and just completely disregard another person is disgusting. And this entire uh, fabrication of humanity just to be whittled down into a quote seems a real disservice to someone that literally from our obviously off the top of our head conversation sounds like she was an incredible human to be on this planet.
Yeah, she was definitely a person well ahead of her time, and
Mhm.
I would almost compare her as far as, like, the favor of the people and how she presented herself kinda like Princess Diana.
Yeah. So I guess do you think perhaps maybe she knew of that? Maybe she wouldn't have realized that a lot of her things would have just gone to waste in terms of just being destroyed. But do you think that she knew of that and thus kind of her lineage was her patron of the arts, her creating this world of art and uh, giving way to a lot of the things that we wouldn't have if it wasn't for her?
Oh, for sure. Um, yeah, because when you have that much power, especially a woman in the medieval times, you're bound to have enemies.
Mhm.
And there definitely would be people who wouldn't dare cross her while she was alive, but after she's dead, I think she kind of thought ahead. Um, and a lot of her things might have been destroyed by enemies back then, even though in my research I didn't come up with any particular ones except for that one grandson that tried to get some of her property. But I think she wanted to leave something of herself in history besides all of her many children. And she definitely did. Even if we don't realize it,
Evan,
the world would never be the same without her.
yeah. Um, and that leaves a real tangible impact. I think everyone back then, and maybe even today, kind of the point of their existence is to have a legacy. And is there anything that, just to kind of wrap up, anything that you've kind of taken from your knowledge of Eleanor that you've applied to you as an actor in our show as a reenactor or in general?
As far as taking things from Eleanor as a reenactor, um, not really at this point.
Mhm.
Most of the time I play peasants. It's only been a couple of
Yeah.
times when I've played a little bit fancier of a person, Lady Guinevere and Lady Alice Delpole. Um, but I did not know um as I know about her now. And whenever I watch any kind of Robin Hood movie when she's in it, because Robin Hood is one of my all-time favorite stories, growing up and even now as an adult.
Mhm.
Seeing her and the way that she's portrayed, um, is definitely gonna give me more of a respect towards the character, the historical figure, and the actress playing her. 'cause I know there's a few different variations, and, Katharine Hepburn, who's one of the golden age of Hollywood actresses, and she was known to be a very strong and feminist woman, and I think she fits the role of Eleanor very well.
Kinda takes up the model example that she
Mhm.
led. Mm.
Yeah,
Which
absolutely.
more people should. It's definitely someone of, not just political and noble, or we'll say royal or rich, whatever, um, breed, but sounds like someone who just kinda took the world by storm appropriately, and,
Yeah, she was someone who was beloved by a lot of people. She was ahead of her time while still being, like, very highly respected by all walks of life.
mhm,
So
absolutely
she's
boundary breaking back then.
definitely someone to look up to.
Mm. And, of course, maybe we'll revisit at another time when we have a little bit more time, quote unquote, to take a look at some of the little niche details that we've brought up in terms of, and if there's any archaeological information, which I'll post on the Discord here. But beyond that, of course, everything has been sort of, at least for me, off the top of my head. So my apologies if I got anything wrong or steered incorrectly. Um, but I was very fascinated by that, and we'll be looking her up a bit more later today. Is there anything you wanted to close in regards to Eleanor of Aquitaine?
Yeah, so she's definitely a great person. I did not expect to find this much information and be this interested and into her and her history. Um, especially especially with how many children she had and how late in life. Like it just shows how strong of a woman she is, and I admire her a lot. And it kind of um makes me love Michelle even more because she portrayed her perfectly, I think.
Mhm.
And her character and mine, when we did Lionheart Year, we had a few interactions because my character was married to Caleb's character, and uh, his character Pierre was the one that killed King Richard. So she and I had a lot of dynamic at the very end of the day as Caleb was being flayed alive in front of all
Mhm.
the children.
Of course, of course. Nothing better, right? But
Yes,
beyond
absolutely.
that, of course, um, you are part of the, as we said at the top of the hour, the FCFT, which is, of course, anagrams in my head. What is
Mhm.
that? The troop name?
It stands for Full Contact Foot Tournament. It's trying to combine what we do as a fighters for the medieval fair, doing what I call stunt acting, um, and SCA or HEMA. So we're trying to get historically accurate costumes while still keeping us safe. So we'll have our, I mean, the guys will. I'm not interested in fighting,
Mhm.
um, because that's a lot of heavy stuff and a lot of heavy, expensive stuff.
Yes.
So I'm just gonna stick to stick to my sewing, which I like. Um, the guys are gonna have modern day protective equipment underneath, and the outer layers are going to be armor, historically what was that phrase? Did you historically adequate?
Adequate, yeah.
I like that. Yeah. Historically adequate armor and outfittings, so they're able to portray a character that they'll make up. We're not going to take characters from history. We're going to make up characters during historical time periods.
Mhm.
So Caleb's character, he is going to be Ian Fitzallen, um, who um, no relation to him, uh, is a Scottish knight during the 1300s, I
Okay.
believe, which is kind of 1400s is the overall theme that we're trying to get the theme or the
Yeah.
feel that we're trying to give off because that was considered the golden age of knights. So we're trying to give that feel that you sorta get when you go to medieval times dinner theater. Like, you're walking in, it's like this big arena with shining knights and ladies and all that stuff,
Yeah.
but
The
we're
the
not sticking to that.
general
Ye
population concept of medieval.
Yeah, so we're trying to give off that feel, kinda bring people in with that, but we're not going to be sticking to that time period exclusively for our actors. I believe Colin, who's part of it and kinda the leader of the troupe, because it's his brainchild.
Mhm.
I believe he's going to be 1200s French knight and, Turnip, who's also in it, um, he's gonna be a 900s Danish warrior. Um, so each of the guys are gonna have armor relating to that time period while still having the protective gear to keep them safe. Similar to how HEMA does it.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not gonna be choreographed fights, so it's gonna be a lot of rehearsing and fighting with each other or them fighting with each other to figure out their own styles and how they can fight together and do it
Mhm.
safely without getting seriously hurt.
Indeed, I mean, 10 plus years of improv, we should be able to, come up with something.
Mhm.
So that will be that for the talk this episode of the Talk Past podcast. I, of course, am NC, usually, and
Um, yeah, so thank you. Thanks for having me again. This has been really fun, and if anyone wants to check out the Instagrams, it's at the FCFT or my cosplay one, which is at Pat period underscore period Taylor. And again, I don't really post on there, but if you want to check it out, there's some things on there.